The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them, or in this case, inspired by them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today on the panel are Patrick Mason. Hi there, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
And Jeff Haecker. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And special guest, Kathryn Laffrey. Hello, Kathryn.
Hello.
Yay!
Yay! Be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your favorite podcast app, and you can find us on the StarQuest YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Facebook, where we are at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And be sure to get your official Secrets of Middle-earth gear, including our awesome t-shirt at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way for you all to support our show and show your love for Tolkien and his wonderful world of Middle-earth. Now, I'm sure you all noticed the slight change in our intro, because tonight is what I hope will be the first in kind of a series of discussions about other fantasy media that's been inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. And today we are covering Tolkien and Star Wars. And since this episode will probably come out sometime in early May the 4th be with all of you.
And with your spirit.
With your spirit.
With your spirit.
So yeah, in case anyone is not a Star Wars aficionado, May the 4th is kind of known in the fan base as Star Wars Day, because May the 4th, May the Force. And then it's followed quickly by Revenge of the 5th. Although, what do people actually do on Revenge of the 5th?
I don't know. All I know is that it's May the 4th is not Orthodox Star Wars Day, because it's not the original release date of the movie. So if you're an Orthodox Star Wars fan, then we're celebrating it early, but hopefully there's no major schism over it.
I sure hope not. There's enough schisms in the Star Wars fandom anyway.
Yeah.
So before we get started, Kathryn, why don't you tell us your background with J.R.R. Tolkien and his works? How did you first come to either read them or see the films? What's your Tolkien story?
Oh, my first introduction was way back in, when was it? The late 70s with the Hobbit cartoon that was on TV. And then my godfather gave me a really awesome book that had all of the artwork from that movie, and then The Hobbit written in there. And so that was awesome. That was my start to it. I didn't actually read the actual novels until my daughters got into it. So my little stack of Tolkien developed in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I can see your box set in the background.
Oh, yeah. My youngest daughter says, "You better have that behind you, Mom." I'm like, okay. I mean, my girls are so into it that each one of them has a different set with different covers, because they all have a different style cover that they like. So I think one of my daughters has 2 sets just for the covers. So.
And of course, you're on the Secrets of Star Wars as a regular panelist. So what's your Star Wars kind of history?
Again, all the way back to the beginning. I was one of those kids back in the day, standing in line for 3 hours, waiting outside the movie theater for the original Star Wars.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story from you. I can't imagine seeing it for the first time where it didn't exist before, because
it was the best day. And it's amazing how it really sticks in your head, because there's only 2 times in my life that I remember waiting outside for a movie. Star Wars definitely stuck in my head. And then the whole debate for the next couple of years did Darth Vader die? I mean, where did he go? His ship flew away, but where did he go? Yeah,
Wow.
and then the T-shirts that used to go around that said Darth Vader was the devil.
Really?
Oh yeah, because there's the big born again movement that was going on at the time, and so yes, there was a lot of clash with certain Christian groups and watching Star Wars. So.
He's obviously the bad guy. Whatever.
Yeah. We were just talking recently. I guess there were parts of Tolkien that it was banned in some places in the U.S. for a little while, or for similar issues. So that's a crossover in a bad way.
Yeah.
They're both banned by certain people.
But yeah, it may surprise people to think that there actually are genuine connections between the legendarium of Tolkien and Star Wars. I mean, first off, of the three great myth makers of the 20th century, like two of them are Tolkien and George Lucas. You can debate who the third is, but like they may be the two greatest myth makers of the 20th century, because I don't know any other fantasies that have impacted the genre as much as the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And yes, Star Wars, people say, is Star Wars fantasy or it's science fiction? Like, my answer is, well, it's both, because it's a fantasy in a science fiction setting. But I do count it as fantasy. And I think that those are the two fantasy series that everything after the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars is influenced by them in some way. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's interesting because with Tolkien, there's the canon, there's the Tolkien canon, it's kind of generally considered the Silmarillion, Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. And then there's the supplemental stuff that isn't, kind of quasi-canon, depending how you want to get into it. But that's it. That's all the Tolkien we get, But with Star Wars, we get, we have the original movies that were, the original trilogy, and then tons of books and comics over the years, and then the prequels. But the prequels in the original trilogy before Disney purchased Star Wars were the only things considered canon to it. But there's because I read, tons of Star Wars books, and, I'm still an avid Star Wars reader, both the Legends and the new continuity. But so much of that, before Disney bought it, bought Star Wars, there was all this stuff was kind of quasi-canon anyway. It was all based on Tolkien, based on Star Wars, but in a lot of ways based on Tolkien too. But and now it's there's more of a unified canon in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's interesting that all that came out of 6 movies for Star Wars, or really 3 movies at the time.
And it's interesting too how George Lucas was impacted, like Tolkien. Both him and Tolkien were influenced by ancient myths and fairy stories and legends, and kind of both the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars are kind of this amalgam of earlier material, clearly influenced by earlier stuff. Neither of those series come out of nowhere, but yet they go on to inspire so much that comes afterward. They're kind of these fulcrum series. And you have George Lucas too, as an avid science fiction and fantasy reader himself. You see Star Wars being influenced by Dune, by Isaac Asimov's Foundation. I read Flash Gordon. And it's interesting, George Lucas is a huge Terry Brooks fan, and Terry Brooks is one of the authors who, in the wake of Tolkien, rode to popularity on the fantasy genre. He himself was influenced by Tolkien, so you almost have that lineage from Tolkien to Brooks to George Lucas. I mean, George Lucas even brought in Terry Brooks to write the novelization of The Phantom Menace. And that's apparently, cool. Because I read Terry Brooks wrote a memoir in which he talks about meeting George Lucas and how George Lucas showed him early scripts for The Phantom Menace. And Brooks was going through them basically with a red pen going nope, you got to change this. This is not good. And all of George Lucas's people around him looked aghast and horrified. But because they thought oh, he's going to get so, but No, George Lucas respected Terry Brooks. That's why he asked his opinion. But I guess all those other people were yes men and didn't want to tell George, what he should fix in the script.
And it kind of shows that,
Yeah.
that he didn't listen to anybody.
Yeah.
But apparently, if not for Terry Brooks, it might have been an even stranger film.
Well, thank you, Terry Brooks, for your service.
Yes.
But yeah, and apparently in in early drafts of Star Wars, the emphasis of other sci-fi and fantasy series is really pronounced. Like, and including Lord of the Rings, there is an article that I'll link to in the show notes. It's from my pals over at Voyage Comics. There's an article that they put up a few years ago about the connection specifically between Gandalf and Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original trilogy. And first, I just want to throw out there, like, do you guys see that connection? Do you think that's a valid connection? And like, how do you think Gandalf influenced Alec Guinness's portrayal of Obi-Wan?
Well, I mean, the costume helped with the hood and everything, kind of like Gandalf's pointy hat. But, both of them having that spiritual leader kind of essence too really helps make it an easy connection. There's quite a few, I think, other characters out there that are just that easy connection. Yeah,
and just the way Obi-Wan, dies in the original movie, it's very similar to how Gandalf goes. He's doing it to give everyone time to escape. The rest of the Luke and Han and Leia and Chewie to get off the Death Star. Different in the sense that if he does, of course, he doesn't kill Darth Vader there, like Gandalf kills the Balrog eventually, but similar in that way. And he does say, if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you ever imagined, which eventually Luke does come around to and defeats Vader. Defeats Vader in the sense of he brings Anakin back.
And Obi-Wan comes back in a more powerful spiritual form. Although he can't interfere the way Gandalf obviously does, coming back as Gandalf the White. But there's an interesting connection from the book How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, which is quoted in the Voyage Comics article, that in, the third draft of the original Star Wars script, there is a scene taken almost word for word from The Hobbit. And I wonder if you guys will recognize it when I read this out. So this is Kenobi meeting Luke Skywalker in the third draft of Star Wars. Kenobi approaches with a good morning. What do you mean, good morning? Luke responds. Do you mean that it is a good morning for you? Or do you wish me a good morning? Although it is obvious I'm not having one. Or do you find that mornings in general are good? All of them at once, replies Kenobi. That is plagiarized almost word for word from the opening scene of The Hobbit.
That would be such a different Luke. Like, the Tashi Station power converters just doesn't fit in with that Luke. Tashi Station power converters.
What's that flashing? It's like
exactly. Like, that's not. Yeah. That's Space Gandalf walks up to Luke. Wait, what? Because that in my mind,
been really easy to add. Run, you fools!
Run, fly, you fools! Yeah.
Well, that's. I mean, he does. He yells, "Run!" in Luke's mind, right? Run.
Yeah.
He does.
Run.
He does. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's Space Gandalf or Obi-Wan. It's hard to say that now because Obi-Wan is such a bigger character now, and not that he wasn't big before, but he was a single. Actor, a single portrayal. And now he's, we've got his whole life story. But yeah, that's how I always kind of mentally imagined Obi-Wan as, Alec Guinness portrayed him as Space Gandalf. Effectively.
Oh, yeah.
Because he just is. Like, there's no other real way to.
Especially because that first movie is so much a fairy tale in space. It's got the young farm boy from nowhere, the princess, the old wizard man, there's the evil Dark Knight, there's so much like fantasy archetypes just transplanted into a sci-fi setting that it's almost unavoidable to kind of make those comparisons.
They both happened a long time ago.
A long time ago. And in our universe, it's just Star Wars takes place in a galaxy far, far away, and Arda is just Earth.
Well, my theory, my fan theory, which we'll get there eventually in our Silmarillion, is that when Arda is separated from Valinor, and you can only reach it by a hyperdrive because it's separated from the mortal world. So you have to take a hyperdrive on a ship to get there.
I mean, that tracks.
Yeah, that's the straight road.
That's the straight road. I have this vision of like the Grey Havens basically being Mos Eisley.
A hive of scum and villainy.
Yeah, wretched hive of scum.
The hobbits walk in. We don't serve your kind.
Here.
I guess it'd be orcs. I don't know.
Yeah,
I want the hobbits. Hobbits are who you want to serve because they're
right. I feel like if any place in Middle Earth is Mos Eisley, it's Umbar, probably the pirate city.
Oh yeah. We're just thinking like Han Solo is Círdan the shipwright.
Círdan shot first.
Yes. We need to make that shirt.
That needs to be a shirt, yeah. But we're getting a bit off the rails. But even Alec Guinness himself like noticed the connection between his character and the Lord of the Rings. There's in the making of Star Wars, this is also quoted in the Voyage Comics article, Guinness discussed how he first read the script of Star Wars. And he says, because of Lucas, I started reading it, and I found myself involved. There was an excitement in the script. I wanted to turn each page to know what happened next, and I wanted to know how each little incident was concluded. It had a touch of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It was a rather simple outline of a good man who had some magical powers, and it was an adventure story about the passing of knowledge and the sword from one generation to the next. And he was a recent convert to Catholicism, Alec Guinness was, and was kind of devouring like all these Catholic authors like G.K. Chesterton and J.R.R. Tolkien. So he was definitely familiar with it. But yeah, there's no getting around the fact that Obi-Wan originally is kind of space Gandalf. And as you said, Pat, the character of Obi-Wan, because we've gotten so much more of him with the prequels and the Obi-Wan series and Clone Wars, he's now a character with a much more like extended and kind of very convoluted, but also very interesting backstory.
Yeah, it's unlike Gandalf, who's as a Maiar he's got that sort of unchanging nature about him. Obi-Wan is not. He's a real dude who lived through a war and friendship and in a very different way than Gandalf did, and so he's got his own kind of thing. So it's I think if I was a Star Wars fan now, like first coming into the genre now, it would be much harder to recognize, because it's really only ultra clear in the first three movies, in New Hope through Return of the Jedi, kind of Obi-Wan and Gandalf sort of connection there. It's not nearly as clear in all the other material.
Yeah,
because because in New Hope's the only one we see Obi-Wan kind of in the flesh by Alec Guinness, and we see the couple scenes of him in Empire, and then like even the kind of brief couple scenes in Return of the Jedi as well. So, whereas you get Ewan McGregor in 3 movies, a series, and his likeness in the Clone Wars is based on Ewan. So definitely a lot, it's more, I see what you mean, Pat. It's like you connect, new fans could connect to that. Whereas, and they see the original movie, like, who's this guy, compared to all the material we get in Clone Wars and everything else.
But there's a connection there with the relationship that Gandalf has with Galadriel in the movies. And the way Obi-Wan does with Oh, what's her name? She was the head of the Mandalorians.
Bo-Katan or Duchess Satine.
Yeah, Duchess Satine.
Yes.
Yeah.
That relationship definitely parallels between those two worlds.
Right, in the Hobbit movies, where there was that very odd tension between Gandalf and Galadriel.
You know, it's like a respect of, you know, you have your position, I have mine, and but, you know, great respect for one another. And they seem a lot alike. I always thought of Duchess Satine as being like Galadriel.
Really?
I think the Mandalorians very much like the elves, except for the Armorers clan. They're like the dwarves. They live underground and they love forging. And they're always in armor.
That's true. Yeah, I had not thought of that. And yeah, I guess too, like, Satine is kind of a Galadriel figure in the sense that both kind of run this hidden society, because when Satine was in power, the Mandalorians they were isolationists, right? And they had kind of cut themselves off from the rest of the galaxy. They didn't want to be involved in the Clone Wars, but they have this power that, you know, everybody's interested in.
This beautiful city with art and music and yeah, very much so.
And just get back to Gandalf for a second. Both him and Obi-Wan, at least in the first Star Wars movie, they both serve like as the similar function as the catalyst for the adventure. You know, just like Gandalf has to give Bilbo his nudge out of the door, as he says, it's Obi-Wan who has to, you know, Luke, you must learn the ways of the Force. You know, and just like Bilbo, at first Luke's kind of reluctant. He's wanted to get off this planet his whole life, but then when the chance comes, he's like, I better get back to the moisture farm, you know?
Yeah, but also different because if Owen and Beru hadn't been killed, he might have just, you know, stayed on the moisture farm forever. But whereas, you know, Bilbo was, you know, no one was attacking the Shire in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Well,
and he's a 50-year-old bachelor.
Yeah. I was to say, except for the Sackville Bagginses, which, you know, are they worse than the Empire? Maybe.
In my essay, I will.
That's pretty good stuff.
But yeah, like we've already touched a bit on some of the more modern Star Wars. And Jeff, I know you found an article where Dave Filoni talks about his love for the Tolkien universe, which is not surprising because his work is just littered with Tolkien references.
Yeah, because you know, I knew Dave Filoni loves Lord of the Rings, and I kind of was interested to see what I could find. And I actually found an article that he wrote for StarWars.com. I'm not going to read this whole thing. We can include it in our notes, and you can review. The picture on it actually has a picture of Yoda and Gandalf sitting on a log together.
That's a great picture.
But yeah, I'll just read this one line from it. He's talking about he never will forget the bookshelf his parents kept in their living room. It had all kinds of stuff on it, but he says at the top was what appeared to be 4 flames licking upward towards an inverted ring. The binding read, "The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien." Maybe it was the creepy eye or the strange cursive writing, but I knew I liked these books right away, even though I found the design a bit intimidating. And he just goes on and starts saying his mom said, "You might be too young for Lord of the Rings, but we'll give you The Hobbit." And the articles, I believe it's from when the Hobbit movie was first coming out. It might have been I think it might have been the first Hobbit, or I'm not sure if it was the first one or which one, but because he was talking about the people he knew from, you know, in the business, because a lot of them had worked on Star Wars and had worked on Lord of the Rings, so there was a lot of crossover there. But yeah, we can include that link. But yeah, he just goes on and talks about his love for that and how it kind of influences his work. But, you know, since he's kind of like basically the George Lucas now of Star Wars, you know, his references and his stuff in Clone Wars and Rebels, and, you know, beyond are kind of littered everywhere. And one of the biggest ones that comes to mind is Ahsoka the White in Rebels, when you see after she, you know, has her adventure in the world between worlds and has a resurrection of sorts, you know, even though not obviously the same, but She comes back, and the last scene of Rebels is her kind of in her white robe with a staff, and looking very Gandalf. And of course, the talking wolves in Rebels, and then I believe the working title of Ahsoka was Stormcrow, which is one of Gandalf's kind of nicknames. So
Gandalf Stormcrow. The Rohirrim call him that sometimes.
Yeah. So lots of references from Dave Filoni, who he's the one kind of story. He's kind of the lead storyteller of Star Wars now. So I think he's the chief creative officer, if I could, or forget his title, but something like that. So,
if I were him, I just would have said, can you make my title Keeper of the Holocrons? That's what I want my title to be.
That's solid.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about holocrons, check out Secret of Star Wars number. I can't remember which one. We did cover it, though.
That's right. Yeah. And that reminds me, the holocrons always kind of reminded, especially the Sith ones, of the Rings of Power. What do you guys think?
The Palantir, because they're kind of communication devices of sorts, and by the time of Lord of the Rings, the Palantir are kind of have been corrupted by Sauron, and uses them to influence Saruman and Denethor and others. Or there's that kind of temptation there, which and you see that in more in Rebels of Ezra being tempted by the Sith holocron.
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking of. Like, it's malign influence on Ezra, and the way it kind of whispers to you and talks to you. I'm like, that's kind of like, especially the way the One Ring is portrayed in the Jackson films. It kind of always reminded me of that.
Yeah, it has a will of its own.
A will of its own. As soon as you start using it. Yeah.
I'm sure y'all talked about this on that Holocron podcast, but it's like the Sith Lords, they kind of put some of their will into these things to kind of create and there's Jedi holocrons too, but they're not, I feel like those are not as they're not usually imparted with one, evil, but they're usually more of a knowledge thing, not like there's this kind of vestige of the actual person who made it kind of telling you to do things. So
I think anything where you have sort of what a relic, right, which would be something that harkens to a distant age in the past that comes from that, whether it be the light of Elendil or the Sting, even some of the swords you see show up, the rings themselves, even the Nine Riders with their rings. These sort of artifacts, anytime you encounter anything like that in Star Wars, it very much feels Lord of the Ring-ish, because Tolkien kind of set the stage for that. Like any sort of artifact or relic type thing that has magical powers, or advanced scientific enough that it's magical powers, harkens back to the Lord of the Rings because of how he set that world up. And how I find it very interesting in Lord of the The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is where we first really get our introduction into the world, but he's written all this backstory already that exists, and so you encounter these things that are harkening back thousands of years, but you don't realize it until you're the third or fourth read through, and you're like, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in a similar way that now we're getting all this backstory and other stuff, other material, starting with Clone Wars and Rebels and other canon, but it's kind of even now with the High Republic stuff that's coming out, getting ready for. We were kind of talking about that before recording, before the Acolyte. It's giving you this kind of window to the past, and I'm hoping and praying that they'll make an Old Republic series at some point to kind of give you even more of that backstory. But it's kind of very similar to Tolkien in that you get the original story first, and then decades later, you get this rich backstory. And there's, so much more material that you could, kind of speculate about that in Tolkien's world. You could learn about all these millions of characters throughout the, the untold ages in it. So similar to Star Wars in that way too.
Kathryn, did you can you think of any Filoni-verse characters, or moments that kind of tick those things where it's oh, that must be a Tolkien reference?
Well, it's funny reading the article where he's talking about loving Smaug when he first learned about him.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at all the different creatures he has that are dragon-like in anything that he's worked on. You got like the Zillow beasts and things like that. And you get kind of that Smaug feeling there. That's kind of cool. But then just for me, there's a lot of settings throughout Star Wars that are very much Lord of the Rings. Like Naboo compared to Rivendell. And then you have Mirkwood and Dagobah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's little things like that you could, kind of see happening.
Even the names of some planets, like, and I don't even know if it was intentional, but Endor is literally Middle Earth in Elvish.
There you go.
And then I remember in recently in the latest season of the Mandalorian, they go to a planet in the Mandalore system called Kalevala.
Yeah.
Where I was like, wait, you mean like the Kalevala, the Finnish epic that influenced J.R.R. Tolkien? And I was like, Filoni, I see you. I see you. See what you did there. And that's, of course, the planet where Bo-Katan is hanging out in her exile.
Yeah, sulking in her palace.
Worst, yeah. Best exile ever.
Yeah.
And then even other planets like Mustafar and Vader's castle are nothing if not Barad-dûr and Mordor.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
If Mordor were a planet.
Yeah. What if I took Mordor, made it a whole planet? Okay, you're going a little farther, George. No, shut up. We're doing this.
Yeah,
well, if Rings of Power taught us anything, it's that Mustafar was a nice green planet until they blocked a volcano.
But wasn't it? I think they also revealed that recently.
Oh, maybe.
I mean,
they did, yeah.
It just seems
There's so
very
much
like
material.
the Empire to me. No doubt there.
Yeah, that's another similarity where the forces of evil in both The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars are terrible to the environment. They tend to just smash or plow over any growing things that are in their way. So I think that, I mean, look at that one planet. Where's the one where Mando, he meets Ahsoka? I think it's called Corvus.
Oh, yeah.
Where like all the trees are just blasted and dead because of all the smog or whatever it is, because of whatever factory, stuff. I remember in the beginning of Andor, the planet where all the kids are on is being like strip mined. So it's like clearly, the forces of galactic industrialization. And it's like, it reminds me of Saruman's speech from the movies where he's saying, the forests will burn in the fires of industry and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you kind of even see that, especially on even though it's not necessarily industrial, but like Kashyyyk, the Wookiee planet.
Yeah,
they start taking, they start enslaving Wookiees and turning it into like a prison, world basically to kind of feed this war machine.
Yeah, and they even I don't know if any of you have played the Jedi Jedi Fallen Order. But I've not played that, but I watched my brother play through the whole thing. And Kashyyyk the trees are being cut down by the Empire to get the sap out of them. It's so weird. Like all you learn about that is that Saw Gerrera says the Empire is using the sap to make a powerful compound. And I'm like, oh, cool. This will figure into the plot of the game, right? Nope. You never hear anything about it again.
So the Empire's in Goliant eating the sap of the trees.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I was likening the enslaving of the Wookiees to the enslaving of the Hobbits. Sort of like
the scourge of the...
Yeah. Where Hobbiton gets taken over and turned into a industrial wasteland, and Kashyyyk it evokes the same kind of feeling. Like,
yeah,
most people didn't deserve that. I mean, maybe the Sackville Bagginses, but nobody else.
Well, I mean, at least in visually what you see on screen, like in Rebels, Lethal's getting just destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Not people aren't necessarily being enslaved, but they're they're not being treated very well by the Empire, and the planet's just being destroyed. You know, so Saruman's the same, you know, like the Empire. They're just destroying everything. All that is good in this world, Mr. Frodo.
But I think both Lucas and Tolkien had a kind of they were suspicious of like the machine in terms of both, you know, modern industrial, you know, practices, but also they both seem to have this fear that society is being turned into a machine, that people are being turned into almost machine-like beings. You know, you see that with Darth Vader. You know, he's more machine than man, and in Tolkien's letters he goes on and on about how, like, you know, this is a guy who lived through the first industrial war in World War I, and so he sees, you know, the mechanization of society as an ill. What do you think, guys? I think that both George Lucas and Tolkien share that kind of, you know, and it comes out in their work of that needing the human to triumph over the machine.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very similar to the contrast of like the Force is this energy field created by living beings, and it's in Tolkien, you know, very much there's, you know, your good characters are the one, you know, your heroes or protagonists are the ones that have the connection to nature, whether it be the hobbits or the elves, or, you know, like the noblemen who are, you know, like Gondor and Rohan, who are kind of honoring the land and not just, you know, destroying it for their own purposes. So yeah, I definitely see that influence there too.
Yeah, that's with the Force, that's kind of like where it shows how the metaphysics of Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings are kind of the biggest difference that you find. You know, okay, you have the Force, which is this all pervasive kind of spiritual, you know, foundation of the world, but you don't have any talk of, like, you know, a monotheistic kind of god or godlike being who rules over everything. I mean, even in the Lord of the Rings, I don't think Eru Ilúvatar is mentioned once, but once the Silmarillion comes out, it's very obvious that, like, okay, you know, this is a monotheistic world. And I think even in the appendices, Tolkien makes clear that, like, yeah, I'm coming at this from an explicitly Christian background, but I'm not going to try and, like, force religious structures into the Lord of the Rings. But you do have the Valar in terms of, like, these kind of angelic beings who guide the world. And I was almost wondering too if, like, the Mortis gods are kind of like the Valar.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was just about to say, yeah, the Mortis gods are kind of, they're still very much, we don't know kind of their full extent. Like, are they the embodiments of the Force? Are they just kind of these beings that kind of are the most powerful? You know, there's still a lot of questions there. But yeah, they're almost very similar in that way to the Valar. Like, and I don't know that, you know, we'll see them as much in future content. I think we'll get stories about them and related to them, but I don't think we'll actually see them embodied on screen. You know, maybe one for something, but yeah, I think that's definitely a Dave Filoni kind of connection, because he's the one who introduced them in the Clone Wars, and they've been in Rebels, and now they've kind of been referenced in Ahsoka. So yeah, I definitely think there's a connection there, even if it's just Dave Filoni's kind of nod to that. I think it's definitely there.
And their world is outside the galaxy, just like Valinor is outside of Arda, and you have to go through this special path to get there.
As far as, like, the Force goes, and I thought I read something or heard someone talk about Tolkien talking about luck in his stories as being like God's will, God's grace, God's guidance. And so luck in Tolkien's world is like the Force almost in Star Wars. It kind of has that same guiding presence that's there, and you can kind of tap into it or pay attention to it. Yeah,
you can call upon it when you need it too. Like with some of Tolkien's, you know, magical items, like you were saying, Pat. Like you have the file that Galadriel gives Frodo, which has the light of Eärendil in it, and it's kind of dormant until you call upon it, and that grace is kind of infused into it. Yeah,
Tolkien has this kind of, depending on which side of the coin you're on, luck or fated, or, which would be the edge, and then doom on the other side of that. Like there is just something that we're going to narrow down to this course at some point. And it does very much strike me as sort of like the Jedi approach to the Force, right? The will of the Force. That is what we're trying to align ourselves with. And you think about like I don't think about the doom, but the doom of the Eldar, or the fate of the men, kind of, or the fate of the world being sort of running down to a single course, and I think that's primarily Gandalf's main purpose, right? Or supposed to be the purpose of the Astari, which is to rally everybody into that course so that they're following along with what needs to happen. And so you have the same kind of like what they're supposed to be doing as far as the Astari, when we only have one that really does its job, Gandalf. And then the Jedi kind of comes out like what one of their main driving focuses when they were still, main and driven was what was the will of the Force, and how can we shepherd that along?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking too, like Qui-Gon, and we only really see him in episode 1, and he's kind of more of that kind of more aloof side of Gandalf. He's kind of following something, not just like a dogma or this one, like you have to do this because that's expected of you, blah blah. He's kind of really kind of tuned into the will of the Force, where kind of like Gandalf is kind of more tuned into the will of the Valar, because he's kind of one of their representatives sent to aid the men, aid elves and men and all all good creatures on Middle Earth. So there's I think there's some Qui-Gon draws from Gandalf too in some ways, kind of a different side of Gandalf, but
something just occurred to me too, and Kathryn, you'll probably like this because it's kind of art related since it's music, but what if the Force is kind of like the music of the Ainur? Because that's the foundation of all of Arda, and the music of the Ainur kind of runs through all living things and through the whole universe, almost like the Force. I mean,
that reminds me of that Clone Wars episode where Yoda goes to the planet to try to learn how to live forever, and you have that song that's constantly playing when he's there. Like everything has that musical tone to it.
Right.
Of course, that's also where he fights his evil self, which makes me always think of Yoda's evil self as like,
Gollum.
Oh my gosh. Yes, yeah, Gollum.
Gollum and Smeagol.
Of course, they both said, mine. No.
Yeah. Evil Yoda is just, I don't like that guy. And Jeff, you'll probably remember this, that isn't it in the first High Republic novel, there's a Jedi who explicitly experiences the Force's music.
Yeah, I believe so.
It's Avar Kriss, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've read the first one, but yeah.
The Song of the Force. And my brother and I were making fun of that. We were kind of like, Song of the Force, what is this? But then when I was thinking about it, I'm like, no, it's kind of like the music of the Ainur, I guess. If this kind of creative spirit at the base of reality that kind of holds everything together. But yeah, were there any other, I'm sure we're missing a ton of them, because like, that's the thing. There's so much Star Wars content that even if you've seen it all, and even it's hard to remember like little tiny references that like You go like, oh, where you point at the screen and go like, I know what that is.
Well, I remember from season 3 of The Mandalorian when they were going to the mines of Mandalore. Like I saw a lot of online of people saying like the mines, they were calling it the mines of Moria.
Yeah.
Or the mines of Mandaloria, because very similar. Like,
and what are they digging for? A precious metal. Mm-hmm. The Beskar is mithril.
And the like in Rings of Power, the Mandalorians need it or they're gonna fade away. I'm kidding.
What? No.
So we make a reference to like a dwarf and an elf being in a romantic relationship because we're contractually obligated.
Our contractually obligated The Hobbit movie reference. Yes. Artoriel and which of the twins was it?
Philly, I think.
Was it?
Or I think it's Philly.
I always get those two confused.
But yeah, I mean, at least visually, like that was, all joking aside, that is a very visual kind of very similar kind of thing. Like you're going through these mines, these encountering creatures and, and ultimately encountering a mythosaur, even though, it's not coming up to destroy you like the Balrog was. But definitely some, just like Dave Filoni. I mean, he's an artist first and foremost he was a visual artist before he was, the storyteller, as he is now. And so, I think he definitely is. Yeah. He's drawing a ton on, Lord of the Rings imagery, and especially, I can't remember if he worked on any Lord of the Rings stuff or if he was, he's probably so entrenched in Star Wars that he was only doing that. But, I think he's definitely like drawing in influences from Lord of the Rings in the more recent stuff.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know before Star Wars, he worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah,
and Star Wars is all over that show. Like, there's, that's a topic for a different podcast. But there is so much Star Wars in it, right? Yeah. But yeah, no. Do we have any final thoughts, other character connections, story connections that we want to touch on before we wrap up?
Kathryn, you want to go? You holding something back? I said, were you holding something back? No. Okay.
I'm like, my brain's going 100 different directions, and then half the time you guys would say something I was thinking of. So,
I'm sorry.
I'll probably think of a bunch of things as soon as we're done too.
Yeah, right. Let me hit stop. So I like how we go from Vader, in the first movie is sort of like the big bad, and we move back into the second into Empire, and we realize he's not the big bad, right? He's actually kind of the big bad's flunky. And to me, it spoke very clearly of the Morgoth Sauron relationship between the Emperor and Vader, and the Emperor is and then with the prequel or with the sequel movies and with the prequel movies, like Morgoth becomes even more like the Emperor becomes even more of an allegory for Melkor / Morgoth, because you see him start out as a senator from this small planet from Naboo, right? Don't worry about me. I'm just doing my own thing. And he slowly corrupts people and talks them into, and eventually he gets named the Emperor and he takes over and throws down the Jedi. And it's all it's very similar to sort of how Morgoth's ride or change from Melkor to Morgoth goes. And then Vader coming on kind of as Sauron, and him bringing on, the ball. You could make a lot of other similar draws to other characters who, serve the Empire, as like, the dragons that Morgoth breeds, and the orcs being the clones, very literally, like
Inquisitors. The Inquisitors being like the ring race.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first saw Rise of Skywalker, I was like, oh, the Knights of Ren are kind of like the Nazgul, but less competent.
Way less competent.
Although, and that reminds me, I remember reading when they first put a chapter before the book came out. Shadow of the Sith. It's one of the newer books. They put a chapter up on the internet that you could read before the book came out, and it was where Luke he kind of like force projects himself to Exegol, and he fights. They're called Sith Wraiths, and there are 9 of them. And I was like, wait a minute.
Not a little close there.
9 Sith Wraiths. And I was like, okay. Like,
yeah, if you, in Tolkien and, as you dig into Star Wars, there's all kinds of lore about like the corrupt, there's all kinds of Sith lore and corrupted in Lord of the Rings. There's all kind of people who were corrupted and tainted by the dark. And, but the one, the one that came to mind as far as like other themes is redemption. Like in Star Wars, it's all about redemption. Yep. And in Lord of the Rings or in Tolkien, that's a big theme as well. Even though I feel like people are not usually redeemed in Tolkien. Like there's some examples like, Boromir kind of is redeemed at the end, but in Tolkien, and a lot of the time, if you're, you do something bad, it kind of, they're very much, an absolute that, once you start down the dark path, you kind of keep going there, and there's not as much, coming back to the light. But there are some, it usually happens when you die, like in, like I said, Boromir or, oh my gosh, I can't think of the king of the dwarves in The Hobbit. Thorin. I can't think of his name. But yeah, I mean, he kind of is redeemed toward the end of his life. So, that's a similar theme as well. You can be redeemed, but you're usually right before you die.
Yeah. I guess the one last villainous connection I would point to is Saruman and Count Dooku. Not only are they both played by Christopher Lee, but they're kind of similar characters in the sense that Saruman is a wizard on the White Council who's corrupted by the Dark Lord to serve evil. And Dooku is a Jedi. If he wasn't on the council, I believe they once offer him a seat. But anyway, he's a high-ranking Jedi, a space wizard who's corrupted to evil by the Dark Lord. Both played excellently by Christopher Lee.
He's probably the most direct analog you could get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you definitely see Saruman. Saruman and Dooku are both they're just being pawns used by the big bad. So yep. Very similar there as well, because ultimately Dooku is just a pawn used by Palpatine. Because you see it right when Anakin's about to kill him, he looks at Palpatine like, what? Like he's surprised, but he really shouldn't be. I
always find that funny. Like the Sith are surprised when they get killed by either the apprentice or the master. And I'm like, why are you surprised?
You're right.
Well, to quote Obi-Wan, that's why I'm here.
That's why I'm here. Yes.
That's why I'm here.
The rule of 2, guys. You have been doing this for 1,000 years. This is
yeah.
So wait, does that make who was the little henchman who sold out the Rohirrim?
Grima.
Wormtongue.
Does that make him like Maul?
I'm trying to think, like, Grima reminds me of other characters in other media as well, but now it's escaping me. But yeah, Grima is a very interesting character, right? Because, like, you, especially towards the end, you feel really bad for him, but only so far, because he's like, and he's given a chance, like at that very end, like by Frodo, to like, hey, you could just leave this all behind and stop listening to that guy. Like,
you could stop being evil. You could do it. Just walk away. No. Okay. All right, fine.
That's almost like the rule of 2 in a sense, because, like, he's Saruman's flunky, and Saruman doesn't see how his constant abuse of Grima is going to lead to Grima turning on him, which eventually happens. you can only kick a guy in the face so often before he's like, okay, you're gone. Sorry.
Hey, we do have one other creature parallel. Spiders. Unusually large spiders.
Oh, so many spiders. So many spiders. Those ice spiders in The Mandalorian.
Oh, yeah.
Which were taken from, I believe, originally those creatures were created back by Ralph McQuarrie they were going to be on Dagobah.
Mm-hmm.
But they ended up being, I guess it was too complicated to create that kind of creature in 1980. So we got it in The Mandalorian, but like, oh yeah, it was almost like Shelob and her brood, right? Because there was all that little armies of like tiny spiders.
And in Rebels too.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were down in the caves, and that definitely felt like Shelob. It's like, oh, they're so creepy. Of course, I just killed 3 spiders today. So
you know what? It kind of things are just coming. Of course, they come to me right at the end. But you know that planet where the Bad Batch goes to, where it turns out it's that giant robot. But the beginning when they're getting in the door, it almost reminded me of the doors of Durin. Getting into Moria
with the Watcher in the water.
That.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, too, when like as soon as they're like they have to solve the puzzle to get in the door, I'm like, okay, this is Moria, and you're going to an underground thing, and but I think that also just shows to how much the Lord of the Rings has just influenced not just Star Wars, but every single fantasy that comes after it, like D&D and just any fantasy novel you read. You can read something and be like, oh, that's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, one that just came to me was the Bendu in Rebels, like very similar to like Mandos, like the Valar Mandos, constantly saying, prophesying and speaking doom, and I don't think the Bendu says you chose poorly like we like to joke in our Silmarillion coverage, but he may as well have when
Kanan Jarrus, you under the ban of the Valar, like
Jail Crow of the Bendu.
Jail Crow of the Bendu. That's Maul.
Yeah.
So I haven't read as much as you fellas have, but are there any Middle-earth characters that would parallel Thrawn?
Ooh. The Witch King, maybe?
Maybe. Honestly, the quickest connection I made was to and I can't remember his name, but one of the original in the Rings of Power, the orc who's an elf.
Adar.
Adar, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He strikes me as very Thrawn-like.
Mm-hmm. And he's an original character who is not in the Tolkien material. But yeah,
so was Thrawn. He was the Timothy Zahn creation, right?
That's true. Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think to me, that's like one of the biggest parallels between the two is Lucas and Tolkien have taken very much I'm discovering this world universe, not I own it. Because, Zahn wrote those books. There were a lot of question marks out there about like, is this stuff going to get trashed? Is Lucas going to come out and say, oh, this is all bunk or whatever? And then when he didn't, it kind of like sparked all of the other stuff. So the entire, what used to be called the expanded universe legend stuff was all as a result of Lucas kind of going, you know what? It's not just my world. It's a world that's out there that I discovered and I kind of set out the stories to. And that seems to be very much how Tolkien approached, the Middle Earth. I think Tolkien was fortunate enough. He could write a lot of letters and get a lot of feedback on things, whereas Lucas had a lot of yes men around him, so he ended up with the prequels the way they were. But I think they have, and I think that's why there's such a parallel in both of those universes, is because of the way they're curated.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think so. And like Tolkien, even in I think in one of the letters, he talks about in the future after he's gone, how there will be, he says, other minds and hands who, you know, continue to explore this universe he's created. But yeah, Adar as Thrawn. Now I'm really interested in that, especially now with Thrawn as he is presently in Star Wars as an exile, coming back to what he feels like is his rightful place. He's very Adar. You know, he's trying to find a home for his orcs, you know. He's an exile, you know. He used to be the big commander of Sauron, but he kind of, you know, spoiler alert, thinks he did in Sauron. You know, at least according to his point of view.
From a certain point.
From a certain point of view. And both Thrawn and Adar are two of the most interesting villains in each of their franchises.
Nice.
Because Adar is basically, you know, he's one of the first orcs. He's one of the original elves that was taken and corrupted. But he still has enough of his mind hasn't completely degenerated into this kind of animal state. He still remembers being an elf, you know, and he has. So there's this interesting psychological aspect to him, you know, where you kind of have that with Thrawn, where you don't know who Thrawn is. Even when he's working for the Empire, he's out for Thrawn. That's I feel like
he's out for his people. He's out for the Chiss.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like Adar, you know, it's the Uruks above all else, you know.
Yep. And we both have, you know, more stuff coming about both of them soon, which is awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. And something else I've noticed, at least in Filoni's work, is I'm not going to. There's some negative words I could use. I'm not going to use those. I think he draws very well from different stories when he makes his stories. And if you know sort of the baseline, you can pick it out. And he wove about 3 very broad, very well-known stories into The Mandalorian. I fully expect Skeleton Crew to be at least 1/3, if not half, The Hobbit. Just as a guess. That's a guess. I don't know, but there's that feels like that's what that's going to be, but I'm not entirely certain yet.
The Hobbit in space. I'm down for that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I might be way off base here, but that's kind of where I'm feeling that show, the kind of energy around that show.
Yeah, because I think the premise of Skeleton Crew is it's all about these kids trying to get home, you know, similar to how the dwarves are trying to reclaim their home. So yeah, definitely be interested to see.
But yeah, we would love to hear from all our listeners too, because I'm sure like you are yelling at your podcast player of choice that we have forgotten something. So please let us know, which you can do by sending us an email at middleearth@sqpn.com, or you can leave a comment on this video on the StarQuest YouTube channel, or you can visit our channel on the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. And before we go, we would like to take a moment also to thank our patrons who make the Secrets of Middle-earth possible, including Gregory N., John F., Lay G., and Stacy O. Their generous donations help us to continue to create all of our shows here at StarQuest, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. So join us next time for our next adventure in the realms of Middle-earth. But until then, Kathryn Laffrey, thank you for joining us in sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Oh, thank you. It was a fun adventure.
It was great to have you. And Patrick Mason, thank you as well.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thanks so much, Jeff Haecker.
It was a gift to be with you, Thomas.
Jeff Haecker, Lord of Gifts. Until next time, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. Let's Science. Find the show wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/science.